I would have to sit on the floor in front of Dylan with the microphone stand because he would turn this way, and I put the microphone over this way, and then as soon as it's there, he would move back over this way, and so I just said, "Fuck it, I'm only going to sit on the floor and
And
like
follow him.
boom you like a film guy."
Bad decisions. Bad decisions. Bad decisions.
Welcome to the Bad Decisions Podcast. I'm your host, Scott Nathan, and today I have a special guest, the first guest that I don't actually know, and he's someone whose name you might not know, but you definitely know his work. Mark Howard is a record producer, engineer, and mixer who's worked with artists such as Bob Dylan, Tom Waits, the Tragically Hip, Lucinda Williams, Willie Nelson, Marianne Faithfull, Emmylou Harris, U2, Peter Gabriel, Neil Young, and the Neville Brothers, to name a few.
Yeah, just a few.
So, where to be? I discovered you because from I've always been a Dylan fan, and then I saw the movie, and I'm really precious about music movies. Like they worry me because I'm like, don't screw this up, and I'm like, please don't suck, please don't suck, please don't suck. And then I saw it, and I was like, that only did not suck. I thought it was rather amazing. Have you seen it?
I've seen it and I like it. I really liked it too. So I thought the kid did a really good job on Dylan, and he got him pegged pretty close to what I know. So yeah, for sure.
So let's jump into the Dylan of it all. How did you first meet? How did you first work together? Was it through Daniel Lanois?
It really started. Daniel had invited me down to New Orleans to make a record with the Neville Brothers, and it ended up that Bono had been talking to Dylan and said, you should look at this guy Lanois to produce your record. And so Bob was playing a show in New Orleans, and we got invited to his show. And after the show, we were on the bus with Bob, and he said, "What are you guys doing here?" And Dan was telling him that we were making a record with the Neville Brothers, and that we had covered a couple of his songs, and that it went well. And he goes, "Well, what does that sound like?" And Dan said, "Well, come to the studio tomorrow and check it out." And so invited Dylan to the studio, and he heard a couple of tracks that we did, and Aaron Neville did a version of "God on Our Side." And when he heard that track, man, he was sold. So it was pretty incredible, and that's how "Oh Mercy" started, and it began from there.
I love that record, but there's not a lot of Bob that I don't like. So not to get too gossipy, but it's like just going through just people I know that have known Dylan and have worked with Dylan. He definitely doesn't seem to suffer fools gladly, and doesn't take any crap from media. But I've also heard he's incredibly gracious and generous as well. Like, there's a friend of mine who I won't name because he's low key, but one day I'm in his apartment and I see a Ziploc freezer bag full of harmonicas. And I'm like, "Where'd you get all these harmonicas?" And he's like, "Well, my dad's friends with Bob Dylan. And every time Bob would walk off stage, he'd pat me on the head, unclip the harmonica from the holder, and hand it to me." And I'm like, "And you just have a giant freezer bag full of them? Why don't you frame one?" And he goes, "Because I don't live at the Hard Rock Cafe. That's why." And I thought that was like really funny.
Good.
So
cool.
So what were those sessions like?
Well, it started off like, we'd never met Bob before, and he'd never met us before. So it's always when you first meet somebody, you got to find their trust in them, and it's it's not that it's uncomfortable, but you just got to find your way to connect with them, and it works with other artists too. But it started off it was Daniel, an 808 drum machine, and Bob. That's how we started. And
a Roland TR-808.
That's right. Yeah. And
Dios mío, even I had one of those.
Yeah. So from that kind of grew into bringing session players in, and um, we brought in a couple of the Neville brothers band members, Willie Green and maybe Tony Hall, and yeah. So it started off kind of like pretty low key, and then once the band showed up, but it got to a point where um, Daniel is he's he's good at what he does. He's a really great guitar player. So he was playing along with Bob, and Bob was just feeling us out, I guess. And so there was a point where it got a little hectic, where Bob was, I would have to sit on the floor in front of Dylan with the microphone stand because he would turn this way, and I put the microphone over this way, and then as soon as it was there, he would move back over this way, and so I just said, "Fuck it, I'm only going to sit on the floor and
And
like
follow him.
boom you like a film guy," and
That's
so yeah,
that's a great story.
and so it was like 2 weeks into the session, and he didn't even acknowledge that I was even in the room. He never said my name, never said anything, and one day I was, I'd rented this house in Sognat Street in New Orleans to make his record, and one day in the courtyard there was like a little guest house, and then and so I had a bunch of Harleys back there. I had a Harley, Dan had a Harley, and so one day he comes in the gate and he goes, "Hey Mark, you think you can get me one of those?" I was like, "Yeah, I think so." And he says, "Yeah, I really like a bike while I'm here." And so I called my friend in Florida, and he sent me some Polaroids of what he had, and so I showed Bob these Polaroids, and there was this one. It was like a 1966 Electric Glide, electric blue. It was like beautiful, and
I know it well. That was the second year of the electric start. Yeah.
first year '66, isn't
Oh,
it?
I thought the 65. I thought
No,
I thought
65's the Panhead. 65's the first year of the
the
electric
last year
start.
of the Panhead, the first year of the
Yeah,
electric start. So
yeah.
66 was a shovel.
Shovel, yeah, that's correct.
Right. Okay. All right.
Yeah. So I
Also
got him
cool.
this shovel head. It's an electric glide. It's a beauty. And so in the beginning, I got the bike. I went to Florida. I picked up the bike on the weekend. Came back, showed it to him. He really liked it, and so I would go out with him in the mornings and show him, like, okay, we drive down to the levee and down across the bridge and onto the other side into the plantations and all that. So I kind of gave him a way to get around the city that most people didn't know about, and so one and then after that he would just kind of go out by himself and take rides in the morning and stuff, and then he'd show up at the studio, and then one day he shows up and he goes, the police are really friendly around here. Says they're waving at me. I said, yeah, Bob, you're supposed to wear a helmet here. It's not like California. You need a what?
That's hilarious.
They're waving at you to tell you, like, pull over, like, So it was like,
That's
it's
amazing.
pretty crazy. And another day I heard him go out on the bike, and I heard the bike stall around the corner. So I walked out around the corner to see what was going on, and he's sitting on the bike, looking straight ahead, and there's like three people in front of him saying, "Hey, Bob, can we get your autograph?" And he did like acknowledge like they weren't even there. It was like he's just
Right.
looking straight ahead, and I just walk up to these people. And I said, "Look, leave this guy alone." And so I got them away, and then I looked down. He had forgot to turn the gas petcock on. It was like a little
Hmm.
yeah, to turn the gas on. So I turned that on, fired it back up for him. He took off. So it was pretty crazy. So that was the
And Bob was your uncle, as it were.
that's right.
So I didn't even plan on this question, but it just occurred to me. So is that studio in New Orleans? I worked for Nick Cage for 3 or 4 years way back in the day when he bought that place,
That's right.
right?
Yeah.
And he said it was very haunted. Did you find that same experience?
Well,
Any
kind of.
entity?
There was some stuff. I didn't see anything, but there was some unexplainable things that had happened. Like on the third floor, there was these big, huge wooden doors that kind of like partitioned the room off. And
Mm-hmm.
so when we moved in there, we were trying to like straighten them, but we couldn't move them. They were just like welded shut. And
Okay.
and then one day I went upstairs and they had moved. They were closed. And it was like, how did that happen? Just unexplainable stuff. And I'd be in the house alone and I'd hear somebody walking upstairs, and I go upstairs and nobody up there. So yeah, it had some creepy, definitely vibes. And um, we had, when we moved in, somebody had brought over this cross, and we put it at the top of the staircase. It had this like beautiful staircase that went right up the center of the, um, the mansion there, and it was Marie Laveau's cross from her grave. Somebody had stolen it, and
Oh my
so
God.
like she was the voodoo princess of New Orleans. So maybe there was some kind of like voodoo going on there. So it was pretty crazy.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you, because you work as, both an engineer and a producer. An engineer often, works in service of a producer or collaborates with. How do you, and I'm sure it varies from person to person, but how do you effectively collaborate with such icons that are opinionated? Like, is Neil Young, Bono, Willie Nelson, Bob open to new ideas?
You
Or
know
do you
what?
press, record and get out of their way?
Yeah, a lot of it is done by performance for sure, and but like all those people you just named, never, not once, did any of them ask me to do anything different, or like use a different microphone, or I don't you do this, or and I just kind of like I got sounds that when I played them back, it wowed them, and that way they trusted my opinion and what I was doing. So I think that was in my favor. So winning them over right away and making it sound really good. And with Neil, I gave him this guitar sound he never heard before, and when he played his guitar, it was like, whoa! It was like, a
Was it
big
acoustic
smile.
or electric?
Well, it started off with an acoustic, and I'd accidentally, well, I didn't accidentally do it, but I put this sub harmonizer on this acoustic guitar, on this little Guild parlor guitar. And so when he hit the low note, it sounded like a bass playing along with him. So it was like boom, like it was really, really cool sound. So he was excited about that, and because he was
Oh,
excited, it
interesting.
made him play a certain way. And then he had brought a couple of electric guitars too, and it was supposed to be an acoustic record, a filmed acoustic record, and so everything was like live and stuff like that. But he wanted to try his electric guitar, and he's got this one. It's like an old '50s Gibson Gold Top, Les Paul Gold Top.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
P90, Dougie.
yeah. It's painted
Yeah.
black, and nickname's Blackie. And so
Oh,
he plugged that
the
in.
Blackie. Yeah.
Yeah, so he plugged that in. That goes into um, two Tweed 50s Tweed amps, 4 input Tweed amps, and then I mic'd those. But so when he went to play it, that sub thing was still on the channel that I was recording his guitar on, and so that set off like a huge kind of like thunder, and like rattled all the windows in the house, and it was just like you could see his pant legs moving, because I was using like 18-inch subwoofers and tower speakers, and so my playback system was pretty, it could thump, so I
It's
think.
interesting because so many engineers and producers I know are really fastidious about having real sterile environments. And just in the being a student of yours over the past few days, it seems like you really like to hang your ass out over the edge and work with unusual environments. Do you
Yeah.
just like the challenge of it and working with the tools that you have available to you?
Well, I think that I particularly find it more comfortable for me to be working in the room with the artist, and so I do like a setup that has a really great playback system with great subs and stuff like that. So usually I have the speakers on while they're recording, so they can feel what they're playing. If if the artist is wearing headphones, like they don't perform as well. But if you give them sound pressure to play to, bang, you open up, and he was hearing this sub, and it was just making him play a whole different way,
It's
So like,
amazing.
yeah, yeah. So, and you would never capture that, him in a booth, with in a studio like that. So, I've been really my whole life for the last 40 years. I've just been either making records in houses or theaters or, you know, uh, castles, churches, you name it. I'm kind of like,
Look, I'm with you. I think you use the tools you have. I mean, I'm a photographer, so it's a different thing. I mean, I've spent my fair share of years in recording studios, so I know a little bit. But I think it's fun to play. Then now, do you go in like so? Sometimes I will spend 3 weeks preparing for what I'm going to do in a single 125th of a second frame. Do you have I do you know what the guitar and drum sounds that are in your head going in, or you
no,
go in and play?
I'm kind of like a guerrilla recorder where I don't get sounds. I don't spend like 4 hours on a kick drum sound. I just go in there. It's like a live show for me, and I'm prepared, ready to go. So as soon as they walk in the room, I'm recording, and I'm capturing whatever. And so a lot of times they don't even know they're recording, and they capture like the first take, and that's the one. Like I made this record called "Real Gone" with Tom Waits, and he had this crazy thing where if he got like a first take, like right out of the box, bang, he would say. This one came out of the ground like a potato. Done.
I love Tom Waits.
Yeah, he's a character.
He's so enigmatic and so creative, and
Yeah.
I can't get enough of him. Like, yeah. So I want to ask you another little esoteric question.
Yep.
So I was watching this, and I don't think you were on these sessions, but I was watching the Achtung Baby sessions documentary on YouTube,
Yep.
and Bono talked about the concept of spirit entering the room, and he said you never know when it's going to come, or if it's going to come, and how long it will stay, and when you get it, you have to harness it. And there's a moment in it where he gets an idea and says, "Bring me an acoustic guitar right now." And he had an idea for the song One, which I know Daniel also played on. And then Dylan said it, a similar thing is that he described it as his bargain with the Almighty, and that he held up his end of the bargain, but he said he couldn't fully take credit for everything he did, and that spirit is no longer with him, but he's grateful for the time that he had with it. Do you believe in magic?
Magic does happen, and I've seen it happen, and it's pretty crazy. Like the hairs on your arms go up, and this is happening. Um, but because you're working, you got to concentrate and make sure you're capturing everything correctly. And a lot of those that song called "Lovesick" um, off the record I made with Dylan. That was a playback mix. They walked back into the studio, and I just played it back. We were recording in Miami, and so I was working on a conventional studio at Criteria, so I wasn't working in my normal way. But I kind of like put some flange on Bob's voice and made it sound crazy sounding, and so when they came in, they listened to it and was like, "Wow!" They were really impressed with what they had done. So yeah, it's one of those things where magic happens, you capture it, and hopefully that mix is on the same spot where they played it back, recorded it, recorded the mix of it, and I never bettered that mix, so that's the mix that's on the record. So that's
Speaking of Criteria, do you believe in studio juju mojo? Like, because everyone from Derek and the Dominoes to the Bee Gees to Clapton recorded at Criteria. Do you believe in magic in rooms, or is it just a room to you?
Well, it's a little more than a room, but you make your own juju up, and I think it was a bummer when I went to Criteria. I didn't want to work there. They put us in like the big A room with a big Neve, and the
Right.
room was just this big spitty like sound stage, and it just didn't sound good. and
Right.
I called the Bee Gees, seeing if I could use their studio, and I looked at a couple other places in town, and so we ended up having to work there because I couldn't find anything else, and ended up I built Bob like a little apartment with gobos and a lamp, and so he had his own little world that he could kind of go and hide in, and
That's
then
amazing. Made a little
yeah, yeah,
a little vibe.
yeah, it made him a little vibe, and so, but he wouldn't wear headphones, so I had to have like a pair of speakers in front of him, so if he wanted to hear a playback or change anything, lyrically, he could do it. So I would be in the control room, and I had to have another microphone that came from in front of him that went into a little amp. So if he wanted to change like that song Highlands, it's 17 minutes long, and he goes, "I want to change the third word in the 17th verse," and yeah, that's what I want to do. And so I had taken numbers on each line of every verse, and so I knew where it was, because in those days there was no computers or anything; it was all analog tape. So you worked off
Sure.
numbers. So so I'd go there, and so I had to punch in to record. Um, Take down his vocal so he couldn't hear his vocal in the room. He would sing the word or the line, and then I needed to punch out and bring the vocal back up again. So it was like this crazy event of things I had to do it so
And
that
this was
way.
like pre-flying faders and all that stuff
Oh
before
yeah, yeah, yeah.
pre-automation.
Yeah, it was a pretty crazy thing to do, and so yeah, so he was having fun, and he would go, "Oh, okay, go to the third verse. I want to go in for the last line, last word," and so I bang, drop him in, pop him out, and kind of thing. So I'm not sure if he's had that kind of control before, so he was having a little fun with me, kind of going around. Like I think he was making it up half the time, but he dug it. It was pretty cool.
Yeah. At the risk of sounding stupid, do you still shoot? Do you still record 2-inch analog ever, or are you all in the box now?
Um, I work with a machine called the Radar. It's a Canadian digital tape recorder. And so it has play, stop, rewind. It works exactly like a tape recorder, but it's on a digital format. So I've never been
Does it
able
have
to.
a sound to it?
It's got the best sound to it because I've done tests with it against Pro Tools and all these other converters, and it comes out on top. Like if I record a kick drum in Radar and I record a kick drum in Pro Tools and I play them back, it's ridiculous. It's like, why would I use Pro Tools when this is you know and when you punch in on Pro Tools, there's like a little delay, like it clicks or whatever, and I never knew. I hated that. I thought that kind of like, took your vibe away. You're trying to sing a song, and then I punch in, and it's like, yeah, it's like a little punch hole or whatever. Anyways, it's a seamless machine. You don't have to crossfade anything. You just punch in, punch out, and it sounds incredible. Dylan's record was Time on Mound was done on 14-inch reels, so I could record 17-minute songs and stuff like that. But
Sure.
but yeah, but after that, like Lucinda's Williams record, that was done on Radar, and same with Tom Waits' record, that was Radar. I was recording both 24 track analog and 24 track Radar on Tom Waits' record. And he's like, I don't think it sounds as good as a 2-inch. So I made him a mix of the Radar against the 2-inch. And we went in his car and had a listen. And he couldn't figure out which was which. I didn't tell him what was what, but he picked the Radar sound anyways. So
Yeah, I think sometimes people are really precious with the tools, and I've always told people, whether it's photography or music, that it's the wizard, not the wand. It's the Indian, not the arrow. It
yeah,
doesn't really, like know so many, guitarist hobbyists like me that think the tone is going to come from, getting the right 59 burst when it's
yeah,
really in the fingers.
yeah. So a lot of these sessions, I was doing a little bit of. I was doing the photography, but I was using my Nikon camera, and I had it set to time lapse, and so I would do time lapses of a lot of these sessions. So I put out a book called Recording Icons in Creative Spaces, and a lot of the uh, time lapse photography I've captured, like with Dylan and Neil, Tom Waits, and all that's all in this new book.
That's so
That I,
cool. I'd love to see that. But
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
but I'm not. But I'm not particular. I mean, to me, it's whatever the right tool for the job is. Like I have a Hasselblad from the '50s,
Oh,
and
nice.
it's great for running Tri-X through and shooting portraits with. But I shoot a lot of digital too, and I'll shoot an 8K red camera if it's the
Yeah.
right tool. But I know these like a lot of young hipster kids who are just like, oh, I only shoot analog. And I'm like, I would never use analog to shoot like a car or a product shot. It's too grainy. It's too dirty. I
Yeah.
want the film grain and the old cinema glass to soften skin, to be kind to skin.
Yeah.
And it's similar. It's reflection, it's absorption, it's it's a lot of the similar descriptors that music has.
Yeah. 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 It's
Compression.
exactly tape compression, and it's all part of the sound. And a lot of people, you record on analog, these younger people, and they're like, "It's hissy. Why? What's that all about?" Like, that's just what comes with it. You just got to print
That's right.
hot and make sure you try to get it all right. So, yeah,
What
it's
was
a
your
trick.
first break where you were with like a big person? Even if it's a sort of a second engineer, I don't know what your path was, but when you got in the room.
First break, I guess it would have been the Neville Brothers for me because, um, you know, I was 20 years old and I was working in a studio in Canada, and Dan come in there, a place called Grand Avenue in Hamilton, Ontario. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's where I met Dan. So I guess he was really the first kind of, big kind of producer or artist that I met. And then he asked me to come down to New Orleans to make that Neville Brothers Yellow Moon record with him, and so I had to get all the gear and
Great
set it
record.
up in the house, and do all that stuff, and then from that I met Bob. I met Bono and Edge and Adam. Like I just like within a month I met 10 of the most iconic people in the world. It was
It's
crazy.
incredible. I'll tell you
Yeah.
a quick little anecdote. So a couple of years ago, I did this little one-man band music video for this female singer that I met, and I liked her music, and I wanted to do it. And so we shot this thing. It was literally just me, an assistant, and some lights. And she calls me one day and she says, "Do you know who Daniel Lanois is?" I said, "Everybody knows who Daniel Lanois is. Why?" He's my next door neighbor. She goes, "Not really. I'm a nanny for these people. And I heard music coming out of the house. So I knocked on the door and he invited me into the studio. I'm like, well, did you tell him you're a singer?" She goes, "No, I would never do that." And I go, "Why not? Why not?" And anyway, it was just kind of a funny story. And then once she knew the enormity of his career, she was afraid to go back. And they were like, "Come back anytime." She was too afraid to go back and knock on the door.
Was that in New Orleans?
No, that was here in LA.
Oh, okay, so that was part of the LA move. Yeah. Yeah, we
Yeah,
had went
maybe.
through many different chapters, from starting in New Orleans, and then we went to after New Orleans, we went to Mexico for a year, and then after Mexico, we ended up on the West Coast here, and then I had a place in San Francisco, an old kind of like warehouse. And that's where I finished Emmylou Harris's Wrecking Ball record,
I
and then I
love that
moved
record.
then I moved from there to Oxnard, California, to this 1940s Mexican porno cinema that I converted into a studio.
Oh, is that the Teatro or whatever it's
That's the
called?
Teatro, yep, yep. And so I made a lot of records there. I did the soundtrack to Billy Bob Thornton's movie Sling Blade.
Sling Blade.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
everybody talked about that place. I never got to see it, but I heard a lot of stories about it.
yeah, it was a trip, definitely. I think a lot of the best work I did was done out of there. And Willie Nelson's Teatro record, he named it after there. And I worked with the Red Hot Chili Peppers there, and Californication's record, and then Marianne Faithfull's record I produced there. And it was just like a good kind of like place to that's out of the city that you can get work done. It was probably one
Now,
of the.
is this gypsy lifestyle more you or more Daniel or both? You guys just like to mix it up.
Well, it started off, that I worked for him. That was, I
Sure.
was the engineer, but I was the guy that I was a little more than the engineer. I, would find the locations. I would bring the gear in. I would set the studio up, and I take care of the accounting. I would as a one man show. And so
Yeah.
it just kind of like once I kind of left Dan's camp, I just carried on with what I knew, and it's just the way I make records. I just kind of find cool locations, and this last year I made a record in the Bahamas on a sailboat, and then I was in Jamaica, and like this kind of like cool grass shack, and it was I just kind of find a vibe and create it. So depending on, like for the Neville Brothers record, I made the studio into a swamp because it's like it's New Orleans, it's swampy
Sure.
and kind of like made it kind of like a bunch of voodoo shit in there, and so yeah, so and that goes a long way sometimes. Like people,
I get it. I mean, you are a different breed of cat, Mark Howard, but I like what you're laying down here.
yeah. So yeah, yeah,
Because I've known a lot of knob jockeys in my day, and it's always just they're either at A&M or Record Plant, and they just do that, or Conway, and they do
yeah.
it over and over and over again.
Yeah, you're never going
And
to discover new sounds that way, like on Tom's record, I had a microphone in the bathroom, and Brain, the drummer, was in there taking a piss. He goes, "What's that sound?" I go, "That's Brain. He's in the bathroom." And Brain, after he pisses, he slams the door, stall door, and he goes, "I want to use that sound." I'm like, "What sound?" He goes, "That's the sound of what Brain just did." I said, "All right." So, and I was recording out of like a little Sony blaster. I took the line outs of the Sony blaster and put it, to tape. And so Brain ended up smacking the door, and then I gave him a piece of 2x4 to smack the wall. So it was,
oh, I know that bit. I always wondered where that came from. Okay.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And then there's another song where he's also in the bathroom, but he's taping up his snare drum. And so he's like, shh, shh. And Tom goes, "What's that sound?" I go, "It's taping up his snare drum." He goes, "I want to use that sound." I said,
That's
"All right."
amazing.
So, yeah, so he, Brain played the whole song on a strip of roller gaffer tape, and then he put it like a kick drum against it. And so you hear that on Tom's Real Gone record. And,
I know it. I know that sound.
yeah,
Speaking of soundscapes, I'd be remiss if I didn't dive into you two. Tell me what
yeah.
that process was like. How into recording are Edge and Bono and the other guys, and how much of it is you? And
I did a record called All That You Can't Leave Behind. Bono, he's a really great guy. He tells great stories, uh, but in the studio, he's really demanding. And so it's kind of, it's like factory work. They got a guy in New York mixing the single. They got a guy in LA mixing the single, a guy in Paris mixing the single, and then Edge gets all the things back and he cuts all the best bits. And so together, and that's how they get singles and stuff like that. That's how I got mixes on their records, is from that mixing that they couldn't better certain parts for, and they would just cut them into other parts of the song and stuff like that. But I was at the Teatro. I had a ridiculously big Neve 8068. It was like three Neve consoles glued together, all with flying faders and stuff like that. And
The 8068 is a console I love the sound of so much that nobody better prank me. My home phone number, last four digits, is 8068. For that reason, when I moved to LA, I chose that number.
yeah, yeah. So anyway, so I'm working on this desk, and so Bono says, "Give me a mic," and I said, "Okay, here's a mic." I threw a 58 at him, and so I had to punch in a couple of lines for him, and like we were on the the record had to go to mastering like in an hour, and he wanted to change a line. And but one vocal was like on one side of the console, and the other vocal was on the other side of the console, and so I had to like crossfade, so here's the original, and then I had to run to the other side of the console, bring that fader down, bring the other one up, run back in, bring it back up, and it was like and then Bono walks up to me. I had cut a little breath off the beginning of one of the lines, and he comes up, puts his hand on my shoulder, and he goes, "Look, Mike, you're gonna have to do it a little faster than that." I'm like, "Fuck you," It was like, and then Lanois pushes me out of the way. I'll do it, and it took him 10 times to do it. It was like fucking. Anyways, they were just kind of, it's intense working with those people for sure. Where Bob it's a little more laid back. Tom is kind of like more creative, and like when I made the record with Tom, I got a phone call from him saying, I hear that you produce records, and I was wondering if you can make a record for me where you just come in and record and mix it. Me and Kathleen are the producers, and so I said, yeah, I do this all the time, no problem. So I get in there making this record with Tom in this old schoolhouse up in Valley Ford, California, um, and suddenly I get a phone call at night in my hotel room once we started. He goes, I'm feeling a little bit like you're a pharmacist and I'm a patient, and you're trying to prescribe me Ziaxadan, but maybe I need to be on Triaxidil. But maybe you're right. But but his whole thing was, in other words, just be quiet. I was being enthusiastic. Oh, that's great, Tom. He didn't want me to be, that kind of thing. He wanted to find his own way in the studio, and so in other words, keep your mouth shut. Let me find my way, and so that was his way of describing that. So it was pretty crazy.
All right, can we roll back to Willie? What is it like to do a session with the redheaded stranger himself?
Okay, so Willie, he's an interesting cat for sure, and so it was only supposed to be 3 songs that we did with Willie, and he wasn't really into coming to Oxnard, and his manager was saying he almost didn't come and all this stuff, and so it ended up we did 21 songs in 2 days, and cut
Jesus.
live right off the floor with the band, and it was pretty incredible. And so Willie was working
Like
on this
live,
one live, yeah,
like Sun Studios and
yeah. This is
Phil
at the
Spector
Teatro.
live.
Exactly. So twin drummers, 2 drummers, one left-handed, one right-handed. No bass guitar on that record. Bass harmonica. Uh, Bobby, his little sister, played piano, and yeah, we had some, a crew of people in there. And so I said, Willie, this is a great song, dude. Like, um, did you just write this? And he says, no, I wrote this back in the 40s. I'm like, oh shit, you remember a song from the 40s? And like, it was pretty incredible. And so, yeah, so we ended up making this whole record within 2 days. And same thing where we cut the song, I'd play it back. And when I played it back, I had a machine called a DAT machine, which is a 2-track recording machine. So I mixed to that. And so I put down a mix so I had a reference. And so at the end of the night, we go on Willie's bus, and I made a little CD, and we go, and he put it in his Bose player on his bus, and, smoking pot and all that stuff. And Willie goes, I love it. And so I never put the tape up ever again. That record is my playback mixes. And so, yeah, so it was like everybody, that was the way it was done.
This is so great. I mean, I love this, just sort of like that you're in the ether and you're open and you're like you're different than virtually everyone I've ever met in recording. So
Yeah,
this is
yeah.
really, really, really great stuff.
Yeah, I got Willie, manager, cornered me one day, and he said, Willie's out of weed. And I thought, oh, shit. And like, this was in like Ventura, California, Oxnard. I didn't know anybody to get weed from. He says, you got to get Willie some weed. And so I had to go to Ventura to find this guy that I'd heard of that was a DJ. And, DJs always got weed. So I met with him, and he gave me this he gave. I went to his house and he said, "I got some weed, but it's not. It's just Mexican dirt weed. Because if you want some good weed, the guy upstairs has got some good weed. It's $800 an ounce." I said, "Like, give me that." And so he goes, "But be careful with this. This is growing in bat shit. This is the highest THC possible. Like you smoke this stuff, it's like taking acid." I thought, okay. So I went and met Willie at his bus at 10 o'clock in the morning, and he's just getting up and his first coffee. And I said, "Willie, here's an ounce of weed I got for you." And he says, "Don't smoke this in the daytime while we're recording because it's like, it's grown in batshit. It's the highest THC possible." And he said, "Fuck that." And he said, "Tom, roll one up." And Tom's his guitar tech. And so Tom and he rolls like a big spliff. And so they smoke this while they're drinking their coffee. And I said, "I ain't smoking that shit until after, because I got
No,
things I got to do." And
no, I cannot function
and
on
so
marijuana
ends up,
myself.
yeah. So Tom comes in the studio, and it's kind of dark in there, but he's like, stoned out of his mind. He's like, "Have you seen Willie's guitar cable?" I thought, "Yeah, it's right there on top of his amp." And so then Willie comes in, and it's like nothing had affected him. He just played normal. It's like the crazy thing about Willie is like he'll start a song really fast, and then he'll come and then slow it way down half speed, and like so yeah, you got to be prepared for that kind of stuff. But and so I got a good sound on his beautiful guitar, the one with the
Trigger.
hole in it. Trigger, yeah. So
I was going to ask
you
you, what's Trigger like in real life?
yeah, it's got a big hole in it, and he goes into the stereo amp. I can't remember what kind of amp it is. I'd never seen one before, but it's not a National, but it was something blue with chrome on it.
Okay.
But that had a sound for sure, And then he didn't have a pickup, so I put a pickup in the guitar, and I mic'd it with like a U47. But and it was live right off the floor. Emmy was singing into a Sony C37A, and so was he for a while. And then I had to switch it to a different mic. But and then Dan was playing along, and the whole band. So we just work up the arrangement of the song. As soon as we got that, we put it down. Bang! That was it. I'd mix it right on the spot, and everything was like done that fast. That's how they.
Fantastic.
That's how they used to make jazz records. Old jazz records were direct to vinyl, to they call it
Georgia
waxing.
Disc, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so so it was a very similar thing. And when you do record on 2-inch tape, the best time to mix it is the day that you record it, because the next day your kick drum won't sound as punchy as it is, because it's kind of like, that's why you got to put the tape on backwards, because it will kind of like melt into each other. It's like, so yeah, so
This is fascinating stuff. I've never heard this before.
oh yeah, it's really incredible. You want to get it as soon as you can.
It's
So
alchemy.
yeah, totally.
So all right, let's go sideways. Peter Gabriel.
Yeah, Peter came in. I didn't work on the So record. I worked on the Us record, and so I knew Peter from working at Real World, and so he came to New Orleans to do some horns and some things on that record. So there's a song, "The Washing of the Water," that I really love on the song. So we brought in a horn section from New Orleans to play on that record, on that song, and quite other. And then we got Leo Santelli to play some guitar, and he's from the Meters. And so that's how we were just doing overdubs on that record. But yeah, I got kind of like Dan said, I really want you to look after Peter while he's here in New Orleans. So I would take him out, and we'd go to shows and stuff like that. And so I took him to see the Neville Brothers one night, and so we got put on the side of the stage on these chairs, and and so I remember like this guy, he was like some what's his name, Busey.
Gary Busey.
Gary Busey, yeah. So he's sitting there watching the show too, but he's fucking drunk out of his mind. and next thing I know, he falls on Peter and like knocks
Oh
Peter off
dear.
the chair, and like, oh my god, like I'm supposed to be looking after him, so it turned into a bit of a, but it was
Was
funny.
Peter a good sport or was he pissed?
Oh yeah, yeah. Peter's such a great guy. He's really shy, and but it's crazy, You when you hear him sing, it's like that's the guy, like that's him singing, like that comes out of him just like that. It's like there's no tricks to it. It's like that's him. It's pretty
Just
cool.
pure.
Yeah.
Who would you like to work with? Who's on your hit list?
Well, there's only one band I'm interested in. I think it's Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds.
Good choice. Good choice.
Yeah, like I go off of like who makes me jealous, and I'm jealous, I'd like to make a record with him, and I think I kind of do good with him, because he kind of works in studios and stuff, so I think he would benefit working in the style, in all in one room with speakers on really loud and stuff like that. So, but
Well,
yeah, and my
maybe we
friend.
should make that happen.
Well, my friend Larry Mullen plays drums for him, so it's so I've been to a bunch of his shows and I've met him, and it's just always about right place, right time. That's the way it works for us.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and same
Okay,
with
this is a
Neil. Like
lame.
I thought yeah, I thought I'd never be able to make a record with Neil Young because he had his own team and stuff like that, and so he saw some record that we saw that we made videos to every song on, and he wanted to do it, and so. Yeah, so that's the only, those kind of things just kind of come around, and that's how they happen.
Speaking of Neil, I'm old friends for 25 years with Graham Nash's kids. And so
Okay.
one night, it was a late night at Graham's house, and Willie, the older son, had to go. He was a stockbroker, and he had to, go to sleep early because Wall Street was going to open. And then
Yeah, yeah,
Jackson, the other son, who lives on Kauai, says, "I'm going to crash." So I was just like, "All right, well, I'm going to leave." So Graham's like, "Don't leave." He's like, "You want to watch
yeah.
Sports Center?" And I'm like, "I'll watch Sports Center with you, Graham Nash." So he's just like, "Do you want to smoke?" So I'm like, "Listen, Graham, I'm not high functioning on weed. I will be ridiculous on weed." So I was like, "I'll have a puff." And he goes, "Okay." So he pulls out this contraption called a volcano. You remember those?
Oh, yeah, I know. Yeah, pups now. Oh, I've
With the
melted
turkey
on those.
bag. Yeah.
Yeah, with
So
the turkey
so
breast.
so I go, Graham, can't we just be like normal people in like a joint or a pipe or something? And he's like, "Scott, just shut up and do what I tell you to do." And I'm like, "Okay." So he hits the turkey bag and then he hands me one, and then my brain is melted and I'm
Oh,
just saying dumb stuff. So we're talking, everything's kind of going smoothly, and then I go, "Okay, give me a Neil Young anecdote, Graham." And the conversation started off well, didn't end well. So he goes, "Oh, Neil's the best. He means what he says what he means." And he's like, "And I can't control those knuckleheads, Stills and Crosby, but they know, they're afraid of Neil. We're all afraid of Neil, that if you're not perfect in rehearsals, he won't get on the plane. He won't get on the bus. And Neil does not suffer fools gladly at all." So I should have left it there, but then I was like, "Give me more Neil." And then Graham finally gets frustrated with me. He goes, "I'm a fairly accomplished person myself, Scott." And I go, "Oh no, I know. I love Crosby, Stills, Nash. I love Crosby and Nash. I love it all." And then I go like this, "But Neil."
yeah.
And he goes, "Fuck off." So that happened. Not my proudest moment, but don't give me weed.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's not for everybody.
Okay. Okay, kind of a corny question, but I have a reason for asking it. Beatles or Stones?
Well, definitely I'm a Stones guy for sure. Yeah, it's like
Me too.
he's my hero.
Mine
Yeah.
too.
Yep.
And I don't know what your favorites are, but to me, the Jimmy Miller era was untouchable.
Yeah, yeah. I think, and you know, they did that record Exile in
Yeah.
France, and
Yeah.
so they brought in the mobile and stuff like that, and it was very similar to they didn't have the studio inside the house, but it was like they rented that beautiful house and they were all kind of
But
living
they
there.
made, but
Yeah,
that whole thing was vibe too, not just the vibe
yeah,
of the recording, but the
totally.
vibe of the life.
Yeah, yeah,
Did
for
that
sure.
influence you? That's why I
Uh,
asked, by the way.
um, not, I didn't know that when I was a kid and when I was listening
Okay.
to it. I only learned that later in life. and I was already into making records of how I do it. So um,
Yeah.
but yeah, so and then and I remember asking Dan had asked Bob, "What do you think about working like this? Like in a house and like we're all in the same room." And he goes, "Oh, we did this before, with the band up there in New York, and little Big Pink and all that stuff." It was like,
Sure,
but
sure.
kind of they all like the band, and I knew Robbie, and so. Yeah, I worked on Robbie's second record, Storyville. And so he came to New Orleans and did a bunch of stuff there. Um, but yeah, yeah. So
I helped out on a session with Robbie and Levon for like a United Airlines commercial.
oh my god, yeah,
And I heard they were in the building, and I was like, "Can I come hang out?" And they were like, "Yeah, just
yeah,
don't make a fuss." So I just wanted
yeah,
to sit back and meet those guys.
yeah.
Uh,
They got some
yeah,
stories.
to me the Stones they sound like guys in a band with musical instruments in a room. And to me,
Yeah,
Beatles records, I love all the Beatles records, but to me that feels like a producer's project to me, not a
yeah,
band.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It was well constructed, and that's we grew up with the Beatles, and we know all the songs. But the crazy thing about the Beatles and stuff like that now. Um, I got two girls, and so one day, we're in the car, and one of the Beatles songs came on, and my one daughter said, "Oh, that's the Cat in the Hat song." I said, "No, that's not. That's the Beatles." Like the younger generation don't know who the Beatles are. It's like it's kind of crazy, and so,
It really is crazy.
it's really because they only knew it from that movie, so and so, same with a lot of stuff. It's become like nobody knows who Bob Dylan is, like in my daughter's ages and stuff like that, and the kids at school, they have no clue. So
But like I said in the beginning, it's really blown me away that ever since I saw this movie, everywhere I go, I'm hearing Bob Dylan now. I'm hearing it in
oh
gas
yeah,
stations and grocery stores. So like now young people in the past few weeks have been like, "Are you into Bob Dylan?" I'm like, "Yeah, of course." And they're like, "Have
yeah,
you heard Blood on the Tracks?" And I'm like, "Before you were born 1,000 times, yes."
yeah,
And they're like, "How did I not know? Was this amazing?" And I'm like, "Because
yeah,
it's just there's no adjective. It's just Dylan."
yeah, yeah. It's pretty crazy. I just saw a post. I think it was yesterday. That "Make You Feel My Love" is the most covered song ever. Like because everybody's covered that song. You know that ballad that was on Time Out of Mind.
How does it go?
Adele. Adele did that big cover of it, and a lot of people have covered it.
But what's
Uh,
the hook? Because
I, I can't sing it to you because I don't make you feel my love. Like it was kind of a very ballady. It was a that song almost never made the record because it was a little bit sappy, like and Dan didn't want it on the record, but and then they thought, oh, this would be a great song for Billy Joel to cover or something like that, like, and so yeah, so it got a lot of attention in that world, and so Adele made it probably the most famous song. And everybody probably thinks it's her song, but it's the Dylan song.
That's an amazing stat. What instruments do you play?
I'm a drummer, but I have to play. I do all kinds of stuff, like in the studio. So, um, but you always got you're in there for the hand claps, like on Tom's record, or you always get dragged. I've been on like um, a Beatles, not Beatles record, but what's his name, the drummer.
Ringo.
Uh, Ringo. I was in the studio there in L.A. Shit, I can't even remember where the studio is. But he was in the next room, and he says, "Come on over. I need some people to clap." So we ended up on this Ringo Starr record. It's like, there, yeah, you got to do little things here and there. So
Ringo's unbelievable. I saw him play a few months ago for a charity thing for autism, and
yeah,
he is doing jumping jacks on stage and jumping up and down. And I'm like, this man is older than Joe Biden,
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's
and
crazy.
he's got a flat stomach, and he's so like his guy I was talking
Yeah.
to him at the side of the stage, and I said, "You work for Ringo?" He goes, "Yeah." I go, "What does he eat? The blood of virgins?" You go, "Does he drink the blood of virgins?" He goes, "He has the most simple diet ever." And I'm like, "What is it?" He goes, "He eats a pint of blueberries every day, and 30 minutes after he leaves this venue, he will be in his hotel room, almost certainly eating a baked potato and broccoli."
Okay, cool.
So it's a very simple, clean vegan diet.
Yeah. So on Neil's record, I was asked to come on tour with him to get these guitar sounds live, and
Okay.
so the record was called La Noise, and it's a joke off of Lanois' name because um, Neil would always call uh, Dan La Noise instead of La Noise. Lanois. Lanois is his real name, and then
Yeah.
we get it mixed up because they didn't know the French pronunciation or whatever. So, anyways, so Neil invites me out to come on tour with him to mix the shows, and so I had to teach his sound guy who's been there since like 1970, like how to get these sounds live. And so they rented out the Wiltern Theater in L.A. And
Yeah.
so I showed up there, and they got like one sub aside, and like they're hanging like um, uh, PA kind of thing. And so I go in there, and I get my box of tricks and stuff like that, and then I tell the sound guy, I go, "This is not going to cut it." And I said, I'm going to need 16 subs aside. He goes, "You're not going to get 16 subs aside. This is an acoustic record." I said, "No, no, no, no. I'm going to need 16 subs." Next day, I had 16 subs aside, and so when Neil would hit those low notes live, it would just shake the whole auditorium. It was like, and so Neil, he doesn't like to have floor wedges or things in his ears and stuff like that. So he goes off feel, and so like if he
He's
didn't.
like AC/DC with like full volume.
Oh yeah, it was crazy. It was like, and old people were like, they weren't having heart attacks, but there was ambulances outside in case. But yeah, I did kind of like maybe 10 shows, and I thought the live guy had it, and so I jumped off the bus in Buffalo, New York, and because I was from Hamilton, Ontario, which is an hour away, so I figured I'd jump off the bus there and go see my parents and stuff. And so I just got to my parents' house, and um, I got a call, and it was Neil. He's like, "Get back here right now." I said, "What? What's going on?" He goes, "My guy doesn't got it. He just doesn't. He's not feeling it." And so so they send a car, and they put me on a private jet, and next thing I know, I'm in Syracuse, and that's the show I'm working on. So after the show, I put the treatment on his guitar, and he can feel it, and like just rumbling the house out. And so I go on his bus. He's got this really amazing bus that he drives, and it's an old Eagle, and he's got like the roof has got two like I think they're vintage cars. I can't be sure, but I think they might be Buicks or something like that. And so I go on the bus, and the bus is deadly inside, all wood grain, natural wood like wood all along the sides, and then the wood would kind of like go into like a Wurlitzer, and then come out of a Wurlitzer and back to the wall. Like it was pretty crazy on his bus. And so I went to his bus after the show to see how it felt for him. And so I get on the bus, and I said, "Hey, Neil, how was it for you tonight?" And he goes, "Perfect. It sounded great. I could feel it. The house was, I could really feel when my guitar was hitting that low note, and it was vibrating." Uh, and so Neil doesn't eat before the show, so um, he could. Neil is of the opinion that the only fish you can eat right now is wild Alaskan salmon. So he would have wild Alaskan salmon flown down every day uh, to the bus, and it would stop in Oregon to pick up some organic blueberries. So he would eat this fish after a show, and so he's a real stickler on, like it had to be fresh and had to be brought in that day and all that stuff. And so the the cook, the caterer guy, his name was Alaska or something like that. And so he brought it in and he put it on the bus, and it was on like a plate. And Neil happened to just look over and he saw it, and there was his blueberries in his wild Alaskan salmon. But the guy had put plastic over top of it, like saran wrap or whatever. He goes, "Who the fuck put saran wrap on my fucking stuff?" And his dad freaking out, yelling and stuff, having a meltdown, and he finally calmed down. I said, "Well, that
Well,
was a little
he's Neil Young. He gets what he gets what he wants, I guess, right?
yeah. Well, have wild Alaskan salmon flown in on a private jet, $50,000 a day to have your salmon flown in from Alaska is like a little bit over the top, but
Yeah, but
anyway,
everyone has their own. There's a Yiddish word for it. Their own mishigas. Their own
no,
insanity. Like
yeah,
there was a guy I knew in New York City when I lived there, and his father had a 14,000 square foot triplex penthouse on Park Avenue, but he was
wow,
and he had a flower service come every day like it was a hotel and flower up the
yeah,
place, and
yeah.
day and night uniforms for the maids, but he was vehemently opposed to the concept of paying for parking. So we would go out
Oh,
to dinner, and sometimes we'd have to drive for 45 minutes. And I'd be like, Mr. E, I have quarters. He goes, "You put 1 quarter in 1 meter, and you will never stay in this apartment again as long as you live. No one should be allowed to rent the curb out. Fuck valets and fuck paying for parking." And that was just his thing.
yeah,
It wasn't the
yeah,
money, it
yeah.
was his, that was his
So
principle.
exactly, yeah. So they all got quirks, like yeah. So Neil's whole record um, was that he only works 3 days before the full moon. He claims that that's when you're the most creative. So we had to wait for every full moon to come by. So that's how and it took 6 months to
Is this a known
make this
thing?
record. Yeah, it's like that's the way he works, and so and he would come to Hawaii in the break, and Dan would call him up and say, "Neil, how's the songwriting coming?" And Neil would say, "Well, I'm sitting here over the rabbit hole, and nothing's coming out," and then next thing you know. He'd show back up at the studio, and he's got the song "Hitchhiker" he wanted to finish, and all this stuff, and so it was kind of crazy that way. But yeah, it was. I'm a motorcycle enthusiast, and I collect
Same.
old vintage
Yeah.
motorcycles. And so, I got Triumphs and BSAs and all that stuff. But I've got this one bike. It's a 1948 Vincent Black Shadow. It's one of the most precious motorcycles on the planet.
I'm
And
well
so,
acquainted with the Black Shadow. It's the first bike to do the ton, right?
yeah, and it was the bike that broke the world speed record in 1948, and it was, it's a classic machine, and they're super expensive, and I was
Yeah.
lucky to
I
get my
I I,
hands on one. So,
I just
but
interviewed Jay Leno at
I
his garage, and I got to see his Vincents and Bruffs
oh
in the
my god,
flesh.
oh
So I'm an
he has
English
about
bike guy
10 of them.
too. That's how me and Leno met,
Okay,
is
cool.
because I have this 72 Norton Combat Commando Interstate that I
Yeah.
was dragging
Oh,
dragging
nice.
around for 18 years. And he would always
Yeah.
stop me and he'd be like, "Nice Norton." And I'd be like, "Thanks,
Yeah.
Jay." And he'd be like, "I have a
Yeah.
Norton." I said, "We have this conversation like 3 times a year, right?" And he goes, "Oh, have we met?" I go, "Yeah, you say nice Norton, and I say thank you, and then you tell me that you have a John Player Norton in red, white, and blue." He goes, "Oh, okay."
Yeah. But anyways, I had it in the garage over at Dan's place, and so Neil was leaving one day. I said, "Hey, Neil, come check out my bike." And he looks at it and he goes, "Yeah, that's a beauty," because he's infatuated with '50s cars, and he had his '50s Eldorado car there that he drove in on from up at the ranch, and so he says, "There's two things that you can't do once you turn 50." He said, "One is ride a motorcycle, and the other is cocaine." And I thought, okay, well, because a lot of his friends had died on motorcycles in their 50s,
Yeah.
and you don't recover so well once you're 50 on a motorcycle. You come off, you're going to break or something. And then all of his friends that did cocaine all died from cocaine. So it was like that was the rule. And so,
Well,
well,
I crashed in Laurel Canyon a few weeks ago, and this little scar, this little elbow, still
oh,
hurts like hell.
oh yeah, you gotta. So
And I'm at the end of my 50s.
I just turned 60, and so I'm not riding so much these days. I only ride on, occasions. But yeah, and so
Me too. I keep him around and use it as a treat.
yeah, the crazy thing about the making of that record was Lanois crashed his BMW motorcycle a block from his house and broke all of his ribs and had his lungs collapsed, and so he was in a wheelchair for the last half of that record. And so like when Neil would come in, yeah, he was just in the corner, drugged out, just looking at it. It was like, oh my god, it was horrible. Anyways, so I kind of finished the record with Neil, and it was kind of cool that way.
So have
But
you d- are these clients, or have you maintained long friendships with your artists,
um,
or execution dependent, I would guess?
well, I kind of bump into a lot of these people, at their shows or at benefits. And so I was just in New Orleans, like, just before Christmas, and I bumped into Emmylou Harris. She was doing a show, and I was on the, I went to see my friend Anders Osborne. He was on the show, and so I
Oh
got
yeah.
to hang out with Emmy for a while. And I ended up making a record for this guy. Um, Max, what's Max's last name? Anyways, Max Gomez, and so he got a gig opening up for Jeff Beck, and so I went out and mixed that show for him and met Jeff Beck backstage and hung out with him. And so I showed him my book, the time lapse
The photo book.
photography book. So I got I got pictures of Dylan wearing this white polka dotted shirt. And so once Jeff saw that, he goes, "I have the same shirt." So, he got all excited that him and Dylan were wearing the same shirt.
That's so cool. I want to see this book of yours, and I want to send you one
Yeah,
of
it's
mine.
called. Yeah, for sure. So,
What's it
oh
called?
yeah, cool. Mine's called
Book.
Recording Icons in Creative Spaces, and it's on Amazon. And I also have like another book I did that before that, and it's all it's more the stories of making these records behind the curtain kind of thing. So I let some things out of the bag, and other things I had to keep quiet. But
All right. Well,
so that
go
that
ahead.
one's called Listen Up. So they're both on Amazon. So
Cool.
if
So,
you read books, and so it's a good. Everybody likes it. That likes the stories, anyways.
all right. Well, I'm looking forward to checking it out. I got to say, this has been really joyous. It was a really just sort of impulsive thing. I saw you. I found you on Instagram. I sent you a note. You said cool, and it was a real pleasure meeting you and getting to hear your.
No worries. Yeah, it was good to hear your stories too. You got some crazy stuff going on. So
Yeah.
yep.
Well,
But
give a bell if you're ever in Angel City,
okay.
and thank you.
Oh, you're welcome, and thanks for finding me out here where I'm hiding.
The Bad Decisions podcast was produced by Brock Workman at Hurrdat Media. Be sure to like and subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts so you'll never miss an episode. My book, The Big Book of Bad Decisions, is available for purchase wherever books are sold. A special thanks to today's guest, Mark Howard, for joining me today. I'm your host, Scott Nathan. Thank you for listening.